Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hello, folks. My name is indeed Avrum Rosensweig, and welcome to the show. Every so often, we encounter a storyteller whose work does more than inform, it bears witness. It reaches into the deepest places of human experience and returns with something rare, truth shaped by courage, memory, and extraordinary lives. Today's guest, or one of them, is Wendy Holden, an internationally acclaimed author whose body of work spans more than 30 books, many of them bestsellers. A journalist for nearly 2 decades, Wendy has devoted her life to telling stories that live at the very edge of human experience, where history presses hardest and where the human spirit reveals itself most clearly. But today's conversation goes beyond the page. We are also joined in presence and in spirit by Eva Clarke, one of the most extraordinary living links to history's darkest chapters. Eva is one of the babies born from within an unimaginable reality. Her story is captured in Born Survivors, Wendy's book that tells of a concentration camp birth. In fact, three births to mothers, Priska, Rachel, and Anka, women who defied death in the concentration camps to save their unborn children, whose babies were born within weeks of each other, 3 pounds or less, their fathers murdered by the Nazis. Eva's mother, Anka Bergman, was one of those women. In places designed for annihilation, Mauthausen, Anka made a decision that defies comprehension. She chose life. Pregnant and bone thin and a system engineered for death, under the constant threat of figures like Joseph Mengele, she hid her condition, endured forced labor, and carried her child forward day by day, an act not only of survival, but of resistance. And then, at the very edge of liberation, Eva was born in a cart on April 29th, 1945, at the gates of Mauthausen. The Nazis had run out of gas for the gas chambers only the day before. Today, this conversation is not only about history, it is about memory, it is about moral courage, and it is about the fragile, unbreakable thread that connects one human life to another across generations. Today, we are honored to hear from Eva and her honorary sister, Wendy. And today, we remember Anka, who lived according to the essence of a statement by Nietzsche, often quoted by Viktor Frankl: those who have a why to live can bear with almost anyhow. Welcome to the show, Wendy and Eva. How are you?
Thank you.
I'm very
Thank you.
well. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Yes, I thank
Oh,
you
it's
too.
it's an absolute honor to have you. And Eva, I want to start the show by telling you that I have special regards for you from my dear friend Ellie Rubenstein, who's the International Director of Education for March of the Living, of which you were on, and where you met Eisenhower's great grandson. Eisenhower, of course, helped to liberate the camps.
Indeed.
And he was very, very excited that we would have this time together. So we will touch on that a little bit later.
Sure. Well,
Wendy,
please send him my regards.
I will. I will. Thank you so much. Wendy, it's great to have you back. You and I have done an interview before. And I must tell you, just to start things off, I am always mesmerized by your ability to write books. Now, I said 30 books, but at the top, before we went to air, you mentioned that your husband said you should be honest at how many you write. You've written 47 books, right?
I have 47 books in 35 years. It'll be 35 years next year since my first book was published. So yeah, prolific, I think is the word. Driven for sure, but driven in a way that is not, I suppose I am a sort of workaholic, but actually I just love what I do. I am so blessed, as are you and also Eva, I think, to
As
get
are
up every
we.
day.
Yeah.
Exactly. Get up every day excited about what I do. And the opportunities I have to chronicle the lives of some of the most extraordinary human beings that have ever walked this planet, and very often to chronicle their lives, not in Eva's case, but in other cases, shortly before they weren't with us anymore, is just the greatest and most humbling privilege. And I mean, it's just the best thing in the world to be able to do that, to have somebody lay their souls bare to you and to put it down on the page for their families, for their legacy, for posterity, for history, and to be able to do that in a way that moves me to tears when I'm writing it very often, and I know for sure moves my readers to tears.
Indeed.
What's fascinating about who you write about, what you write about, is that you will be reading something perhaps in a newspaper, and you'll come across this very compelling point, and it'll grab you,
Yes,
as it did in the case of this book, Born Survivors.
yes.
Let's bring it around to Canada a little bit, which is where I live. Tell us the Canadian aspect of Born Survivors.
Yes, well, a friend of mine at the time was the editor. I think it's called the Toronto Star. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And he, I used to read it online. I don't sleep very long. I'm one of those people that can sort of live by 4, 5, or 6 hours sleep a night. And so in the middle of the night, I read all sorts of things and catch up with things. And I was reading that newspaper in 2014 or maybe 13 even, and read an obituary of a woman who had died. She was in her 80s. She'd had a long and full and happy life, children and grandchildren. But as a young woman, she'd been pregnant in Auschwitz and her baby had been taken away and murdered. And I thought, I wonder if any babies survived actually being born in the camps. And I'd never heard anything about that. I'd never read anything about it. So then I went down a whole sort of Google rabbit hole for a few days looking for any information whatsoever. And I came across the name Anke Bergman, who had given birth to a little girl at the gates of Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria on the banks of the River Danube. And I thought, I wonder if she's still alive, and I'd love to talk to her. And I found out that very sadly she'd passed just 6 months prior, but that her daughter Eva was still alive. And if she had lived in Australia at that point, because I couldn't find any other thing, any book ever written about babies born in the camp that had survived, I would have got on a plane to Australia to meet her. But I always believe these things are meant to happen because Eva happens to live 90 minutes away from me in England.
Yes.
And off I went, and well, we just formed an instant bond, didn't we, Eva? It was just immediate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we had a very emotional day together, and she told me about her mother. It was particularly emotional for her because I was asking her questions about a beloved mother who died at 96 just a few months earlier. And at the end of the day, I asked her if she would do me the privilege of letting me write her mother's story.
Yes.
And she reached out and touched my arm and said, I've been waiting for you for almost 70 years.
Oh, that's nice. That's lovely. I have tears in my eyes when I hear that.
And I think, if I can say, Avrum, am I correct in saying that the fact we met is that beshared?
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. Yeah. Now you're an honorary Jew.
As well.
As well, yeah. Wendy, so you read about this woman. She's a Canadian woman. She lost her child in Auschwitz. So the child was taken away and murdered, and it gripped you, and you decided to pursue it. What was the essence of that story, of that idea, of that reality that drew you in?
It has to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. That's my kind of prerequisite. And since I've been writing about the Holocaust, and I think I've written 6 or maybe 7 books on it now, of course, at all the events I do, the public events, lots of people come up to me afterwards and tell me that they'd love me to write their family story, their, extraordinary survival story, or whatever had happened to them. And they're all amazing, Avrum, and they're so valid, and they should all be written, and I wish they all could be written. But I haven't, I'm not going to live that long. And it really has to qualify to make my hair stand up on end. And I just thought, I was looking for the untold stories. That's what I really loved. I loved it as a journalist, and I love it as an author, to find the stories that are different to other stories that have been told. And it was incredible to me that after 70 years, there had never once been a single book written about babies born in the camps that had survived. And I just knew that I was I was onto something that was just going to be unique and important. And indeed, it's become important. It's been published in 26 countries and it's been adopted for the curriculum in schools around the world. And Eva and I spend a great deal of time talking in schools. So it's a wonderful thing that, that has happened out of me reading that obituary.
I did a little bit of research on how many babies were indeed born in the concentration camps. And there were an awful lot. There were, in Auschwitz alone, there were several hundred births are believed to have occurred. Um, there were births that occurred in Bergen-Belsen, and other concentration camps. Fascinatingly, by the way, there was a prisoner midwife, Stanislawa Leshniska. You're familiar with
Yes,
her?
I know of her. Yes, I'm familiar
Yeah,
with her, who was amazing and did wonderful things. Yes, I mean, a lot of it, it stands to reason. You've got millions and millions of people passing through the
yeah,
camps,
yeah.
and a certain percentage is going to be pregnant, and they're going to give birth. And it's not that it's rare that there were babies that were born in the camp. It's rare that there were babies that survived, that had been written about. That was the thing. On the very train that Eva's mother and the two other mothers I write about went on a terrible long journey, which we'll probably be talking about later, 17-day sort of awful journey with very little food or water. There was another pregnant woman, and she was pregnant by a guard at the camp. And because she was, she was friends with the Nazi guard, she'd been given so much more food and sustenance. So when her baby was born, I think a week or so after these babies were born, the baby weighed over 9 pounds, and
Yes,
these ones
yes.
weighed 3. So there will always be babies born through rape, through coercion, and through survival techniques that women used because they felt they had no other alternative. But there were also women like Anka, Priska, and Rachel, who were young, happily married women who were looking forward to bringing up children with their husbands and having a wonderful life. So it's just that what's unusual and unique about it is the fact that these not only survived, but that nobody had ever written about any babies that had.
Well, why do you think no one wrote about it?
Well, it's a very difficult subject to talk about. I mean, in all the years I've been working with Holocaust survivors, as I'm sure you know, a lot of the Holocaust survivors took their secrets to the grave.
Yes.
It was too much to bear to share it. My father had fought the Japanese in Burma, and he never talked about it. I regret not pressing him enough, to find out more about it. He only ever spoke about it once, and it was the only time I ever saw him cry. And I know from my own experience as a foreign and war correspondent, there are certain things that I have only told my husband and not really told anybody else because they were just too horrific to share.
Yes.
You don't want to burden somebody with the memories of the things that you've seen, even if they haven't seen them. The imagination is a very powerful thing. So I totally understand why they didn't want to tell people, and certainly not young children, because they were trying to start new lives. If they'd by then got married and had their own children, they wanted to give them a fresh, clean start, a clean break, and they didn't want to burden them with the history of their what had happened to them and their families. And the parents varied enormously. Even the 3 mothers varied enormously in what they were able to tell their children. And Eva was fortunate I think, in many ways, in that Anka was extremely open about it from the start.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
She
Eva,
was.
I'll get to you in one moment. I just have to
Sure.
reiterate a question or a more of a statement that I made in our last interview. What fascinates me about you, Wendy, is that you've written about so much of the darkness within our existence, within our world, and yet you're a very happy person.
Yes, I am. Funny enough, I was interviewed since our interview, Avrum,
Yeah.
by a psychiatrist who has a podcast. And when she was asking me quite deep questions about my experiences as a war correspondent and some of the things I'd seen and how I had a mild form of PTSD especially after the first Gulf War, And it's one of the reasons I don't sleep so well, and I have nightmares, and my poor husband's been battered and bruised many times. She believed in her psychoanalyst role that I am searching for the humanity and the inhumanity of these stories as a way of healing myself.
Mm,
And
mm,
to start with, I kind of laughed at that, but actually, the more I think about it, the more it rings true. Because of all my books, I've written, as I said, 6 or 7 on the Holocaust, but various other ones have also been about war, and I've been drawn back to it time and again. And not just because of my own experiences, but because both my parents lived through the war, and because they had some very harrowing experiences. My father in Japan, and my mother's fiance was killed aged 18 parachuting into Holland. And she had her wedding dress ready and everything. I mean, it must have been the most devastating thing to have happened. But she found great happiness with my dad. They were married for 55, 56 years or something. They died 12 weeks apart.
did they? Did they?
Yeah, and they were positive, wonderful, smiley, beaming people. And they taught me and my siblings that no matter what life throws at you, and it will, you have to find ways to find the positive, to find ways of coming out of it with a smile on your face.
Yes, and by the way, you have a wonderful smile.
Yes, yes, she does.
Doesn't she have a lovely smile? I know. Eva, let's talk about your mom.
Okay.
Let me just unroll the carpet here for a moment. God bless her soul. She's passed away. She is described in the book as a ravishing, beautiful woman, as somebody who knew English, French, German fluently, and then a number of other different languages, probably a little bit less so. Was a reader, voracious reader, just a fascinating woman who just dove into life as it was. And then the war broke out, right? And things changed for her dramatically. And she and her husband ended up in a ghetto in Czechoslovakia. Tell me, what do you remember of your mother, even in her older age, of those types of things? Was she the type of woman who always had that sort of gleam in her eye? Was she always a compelling type of mom, and compelling type of woman, even as she aged?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you that my mother was always known as the smiling anchor.
Was she?
all her life, from being a little girl and all her life till pretty late on. I mean, not towards the end, but, pretty late on. She was always very positive. She had a very positive attitude towards life. She enjoyed life. She enjoyed being with, her good friends and also meeting people. She was a very positive sort of woman. And I'm not sure what else you want me to say.
No. What sort of mom was she? Was she a doting mother? Did she allow you your space?
Yes and no. She was quite strict. She had a very quick temper.
Yes.
But I think she was one of those people whose bark was worse than their bite. And she would, she wasn't backward in giving me a smack. That happened quite often. And I cannot, you might want to edit this out, but I can tell you the last time she ever did smack me, I was a teenager and I had been cheeky, and she smacked me across the face. And I remember I was upstairs in our house and she was halfway down the stairs, and I said to her, do you feel better now? And she ran back up the stairs and she smacked me again. But she never smacked me after that. She realized it had no effect anymore. That was done.
Are you still cheeky?
Yes.
Might serve you well, actually.
So, my mother was very positive, and she liked people. She liked being with people. She was very sociable.
She only went to university, didn't she, because of the social life, you said?
Well, yeah, that is true.
That was her page with the people.
Yeah, that was her first. She was the first person in her family to go to university.
Yes.
And because she came from a small town, she desperately wanted to be in Prague for the social life. And as far as I can make out, although she did pretty well in that first year, but she spent most of her time in cafes and nightclubs.
I really like your mom a lot, by the way. Now, you
Will you
didn't
be
know your
will you be showing any pictures of her, Avram? Because I have one in the book here I can hold up if you think that would be
please share it with
helpful.
me. Yes.
Keep talking for a bit and I'll find it.
You didn't know your father. He was murdered by the Nazis.
Yeah.
What do you know about him? What was he like?
Oh, I know a lot about him. I know a lot about him because if Wendy's looking for that's my parents on their wedding day.
That's where you get your looks, Eva.
Yeah.
Lovely people.
They're
Yes.
both like movie stars.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I can assure you that photograph was not retouched.
Beautiful.
Wait a minute. Sorry, what were you saying? What do I know about my
Yeah,
father?
tell us about your
Well,
dad.
I know a lot about my father because, my mother was very happy to talk about him, to tell me about him. Also, I met his younger brother and his younger sister, both of whom survived. I didn't know my aunt very well, but I did know my uncle quite well. And they were full of stories. Also, my uncle's wife in Holland, she also knew my father. And also I met one or two of his friends who'd also survived. And so I heard all these, very glowing reports about this dashing, I have to say, womanizer who broke hearts all over the place. I heard a lot about him. And of course, for me, it was just very romantic. It didn't hurt because I didn't know him. And I was very happy with my daddy, who was my stepfather. He was my daddy in everything except biologically. So my father's always been a very romantic figure in my life. And because, his looks helped, certainly.
Has he ever come to you in a dream?
No, never.
So
I
your
found
mother,
one lovely thing in the research. I will just say, when I was deep in the sort of the bowels of the Jewish museum in Prague for weeks at a time, looking for research for this, and I just came across a letter that he had submitted as a German in Prague, requesting the authorities allow him to stay because he was Jewish and he was worried about, it was before the Nazis came, of course, and he had signed it with the fountain pen and ink, and I got a copy of it, and I framed his Bent's signature for Eva, so she had her dad's signature.
Yeah.
It was quite a moving moment, actually, wasn't
sure.
it?
Absolutely.
and it might be such a moving moment. And tell me if this works for you. The idea that there is his signature, it brings him to life, right?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I have that with
absolutely.
my father. My father was not an open man, but he was a voracious reader. He was a bibliophile. And when I open up his books today, he actually underlined sentences.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
there's his spirit.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Alan Bennett says, when you find something like that, it's like a hand reaching out of the book
Yeah.
and taking yours.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Beautiful.
No, I agree.
Eva,
Also, Avram, I have just a couple of photographs of my father when he was a young man, when he was a young boy, in fact, as well. So that also helps to, give me an idea of his family, of my grandparents, and
Yes.
that sort of thing.
Eva, I think as children, we often look towards memories and perhaps nuances of our parents' life that help us to understand who they were as people. Your mother, Anka, she followed your father to the camp voluntarily after being in Terezin Ghetto north of Prague. And in the book, Wendy writes, she got there and quickly realized this is a living hell. What have I done? But in essence, what she had done was she was expressing her deep, deep love for your husband, for her father,
Sure.
right?
And she never ever dreamt what Auschwitz was. She had no idea what Auschwitz was.
Yeah.
Because all the few rumors they did hear, she said they were so bizarre, you just couldn't believe them. And she thought that nothing could be worse than Theresienstadt. So she went. It was the most natural thing in the world for her to go, to follow him.
Yeah, Wendy, you wrote that to her, Terezin Ghetto was like a paradise, right? after
Well,
seeing
it was a
that?
horrible place, and thousands died of
In of
disease
itself, yes.
and things, yeah, in itself.
Yeah.
But of course, by comparison to Auschwitz, it
Mm.
was. But a lot of families followed people who were sent to Auschwitz. All they
Yes.
were told was that they were going to be sent east to work camps.
Yeah.
And for example, Eva, Anka, and Bernd were in Terezin, I think, for almost 3 years, weren't they?
For 3 years. Yeah.
For 3 years, which is a very long time to have been together
Yeah.
and sort of survived. And it was because he was so useful. He was a carpenter, more than a carpenter. He was a cabinet maker. He was a set designer. He was all sorts of things. But so he was useful to them enormously. So they kept useful people. And Anka actually had a job
She
as well.
worked. Mm.
And she worked and delivered and distributed milk and so on. So they were alive there. And then when he got the ticket to go east to this work camp, and they thought it was going to be the same sort of setup, but somewhere else, it just felt natural to her to want to go with him. It was absolutely out of love and out of terror at being separated and perhaps not finding each other again.
Yeah.
But entire families would volunteer to follow these people that got the ticket and had to go. It was almost like a lottery whether or not they went. But people would then volunteer to go with them because they assumed that they would at least be able to stay together as they had done in Terezin.
Mhm.
So the book Born Survivors is about three women, as I mentioned before. Let's veer away for one moment from Eva's mom, Anka. Tell us about the other two women you wrote about. What were they like?
Well, they were very different, all of them, very different and individual. Anka was the first one I came across through Eva. And actually, I was originally just going to write about Anka and Eva. I was never going to do anything more than that. But then Eva told me that she'd met the other two babies in 2010 at Mauthausen at a reunion there, a commemoration of the liberation. It was going to be the last year that the American liberators would be able to make it.
Yeah.
And they had met each other there, and they had become very close, at what I call siblings of the heart. And they spoke to each other all the time, and even though the others two were in America. And so once I started to chat to them, I realized I couldn't ignore them. I had to include them in the book as well. So Priska was Hannah's mother. And she was quite a character right to the end of her life. She was quite an indomitable spirit. She was very gifted linguist, wanted to be a professor of languages, which indeed she became after the war. She was quite a hard character in many ways. I mean, she was tough. And she married Tibor, who was a journalist in Bratislava in Slovakia. And they thought they were going to be okay there because it was slightly better conditions in Bratislava to start with, but unfortunately that changed. She lost 3 babies before she became pregnant with Hannah, which is incredible to think that she lost babies in peace, not exactly peacetime, but under occupation, but then hung on to Hannah during the worst 9 months of her life, slave labor and starvation. But she just so desperately wanted that child, and she did, and she was incredible. And after the war, she refused to marry again, and she became a professor of languages, and she lived into her late 80s. Rachel was a very privileged young woman, in as much as her parents had money and some wealth anyway. But then she married Monique, whose parents had a lot of money. They were mill owners, and they had an apartment in Warsaw. She had 8 younger siblings, and she'd spent her entire childhood sort of helping her mother out with them. So she wasn't planning on having children straight away at all. But she got pregnant in Łódź ghetto in Poland. And then they got separated and rounded up, and she never really saw her. Well, she never saw Monique again. Her husband, he was shot dead in the ghetto. And all 3 mothers arrived in Auschwitz to come under the scrutiny of Dr. Joseph Mengele in Auschwitz to be chosen for life or death, depending on whether or not they were considered to be fit enough for work. And all 3 mothers at that point were 2 months pregnant, but not yet showing. And when they were asked by him, who marched up and down in front of the lines and looked them in the eye and said, "Are you pregnant, pretty woman?" with a smile. None of them knew whether to say they were pregnant or not would save them and their unborn children, or whether it would be better to stay quiet. But when they saw him yanking pregnant women out of the line and sending them into a corner, and they looked absolutely terrified, they instinctively knew that it would be better to say no and just hope that somehow they could conceal their pregnancies for the next 7 months.
Are there a lot of pregnancies during wartime?
Sorry?
Are there a lot of pregnancies during wartime?
Yes, I mean, well, Eva can tell that story about when you
Eva.
asked your mum,
Yeah.
you asked your mum about how she got
Yeah.
pregnant.
Well, when you say, Avrum, are there a lot of pregnancies in wartime? I'm sure, because it's the most normal, natural way of finding comfort, release, and a few minutes of happiness. But yes, as Wendy's just mentioned, because my mother was always able to talk to me about her experiences, and when she told me she was, she found she was pregnant in Terezin, and I, as a rather curious teenager, said, "So, how come? How come you got pregnant? You weren't my father." And she replied in a very clever way. She said, "Well," she said, "it was very, very dangerous, but your father and I got together secretly as and when we could, and to hell with the consequences, end of story." But it wasn't the end of the story. Shall I carry on with what happened afterwards?
Yes, please. I like this story. Yes.
It wasn't the end of the story, and it had very, very serious consequences, because to become pregnant in a concentration camp was considered by the Nazis to be a crime punishable by death, because they were trying to annihilate, they were trying to murder every single member of the Jewish people. They couldn't prevent women coming into the camps pregnant, but the reason for the segregation while there was so that they could not become pregnant. Anyway, when the Nazis discovered that my mother and 4 other women were also pregnant, they made these 5 couples sign a document that said that when the babies were born, they would have to be handed over to be killed. Except they didn't use the word kill, they used the word euthanasia. And my mother had never heard the word euthanasia. She had to go and ask somebody what it meant. In the event the other 4 babies were born, we don't actually know what happened to those families. We assume they all perished in Auschwitz. When my brother, Jiří, that means George, he was born in February of 1944. He was not taken away from my parents, but he actually died of pneumonia 2 months later. And his death meant my life and my mother's life, because had she arrived in the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp holding my brother in her arms, they would have both been sent instantly to the gas chambers. But because she arrived in Auschwitz not holding my brother, and although she was pregnant with me, nobody knew. She knew, but nobody else knew, and it didn't show. So again, she lived to see another day.
I'm just curious, Eva, does God fit into this whole picture?
I'm sorry, but not for me. Not for my mother, not for me. I don't come from a religious family, an observant family. My
Yes.
parents were not observant. My grandparents were also not observant. As far as I know, the only person who would go to synagogue on the high holy days was my maternal grandmother, and she would go home. And again, Avrum, you can delete this, because I certainly do not want to offend anybody, and I hope I don't offend you either.
Oh, go
But
ahead.
my grandmother would come home from synagogue and she would cook the Czech national dish, which is roast pork.
Okay. Okay.
And I have
It's
to tell
interesting.
you,
Sorry.
no, I just want to say, I have to say that is my religious background. My mother had never set foot in the synagogue until she came to this country. And then it was to attend, weddings, funerals, bar mitzvahs.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Go
I was
ahead.
going to
No,
say
you go ahead. Wendy. Yes.
all 3 mothers married. Priska didn't marry at all, but Rachel, they all, they didn't reject Judaism, but they rejected ideology.
Yes.
They had seen what ideology could do to people when it got out of hand. And as they'd never been very devoted to start with, they rejected it, and they didn't have anything more to do with it. And, Eva has married a Gentile, and I think, in fact, all of the grandchildren have, apart from Hannah's boy. So it's kind of interesting how that goes, because if you... and by the way, all 3 mothers would say it was God. It wasn't God. It was luck. They would
Yes.
say it's
It was
down to
luck.
timing. Luck, absolutely down to timing. Things like that. Things like Eva's brother dying and then saving her life. Had that not happened, we would never have heard of Anka and her little baby boy. They'd have gone into the gas chamber and had just been another number in numbers of millions. So these are extraordinary things. And the tragedy is that there were millions of thousands, hundreds of thousands of women like Anka and Rachel and Priska, who didn't have that luck and who were sent straight to the gas chamber. And whether or not people believe it was God had a hand in that one way or the other is wonderful. It's wonderful what you believe. My father always said, whatever you believe, believe.
Yes.
And that's so true. But mostly they would say, and actually a lot of the Holocaust survivors I've worked with would say, luck and timing played such a massive part.
What do
What
you
I
say?
have to say, sorry, Avrum, what I have to say also is that my mother, she had a lot of respect for the people in the camps who did cling to their faith and maintain their faith despite everything. It just wasn't relevant in her case.
Yes, I understand. I get that entirely. What do you say, Wendy? Does God play a role in this?
I wouldn't dare say one way or the other, just in case.
But yeah, that's also a good point.
I'm hedging my bets here. I was raised as a Church of England Protestant and went to church on Sunday. My father believed in Christianity with a small c, and he knelt by his bed every night and prayed. And when he died, in his wallet was a little laminated prayer that I still have, and it was just about kindness and charity and love, basically.
Let's go back to Anka. Let's talk about Anka because she's really, if you will, the star of the story. I think that anybody who hasn't read this book, and God willing they will, I guess the questions are, your mom was 45 kilo at best. She was very, very thin. And there she was in the camps being watched all the time, being checked out all the time by the SS, Mengele, and so on. How, Wendy, or how, Eva, did she, was she able to hide her pregnancy?
Well, I assumed that she hid it, like all three of the mothers, through just the fact that by chance, they were all given sort of baggy clothes. And and also when they arrived in Auschwitz, they were only 2 months pregnant, all three of them. So it wouldn't really show, especially not if you're wearing something loose. And so, I mean, she didn't, I've no idea if she sort of consciously hid it. I don't think so. She just, carried on, like the saying goes, keep calm and carry on. And I think that's what she did.
And a 45-pound woman carrying a 3-pound baby, maximum 3-pound baby, isn't going to be showing that much to show, But they were all thrown baggy dresses. They were thrown old lady dresses, basically.
Yeah, sure. But wait a minute. Sorry to interrupt. Wasn't she 35 kilograms?
Sorry, I guess we're in stones over here. We're in stones over here. We don't know where we are.
We are. She weighed 5 stone, which I think is 70 pounds. Is that
70.
Right?
Yes, sorry, 35 kilos.
Yes. And I think that is 35 kilograms, I think.
Yes.
You know what I was wondering about as well, being a neophyte in this area. I have one son. I was in the birth room, and it was a miracle for me. It was absolutely beautiful to watch. But I do know that Noah's mom watched herself very carefully during pregnancy. And all the rules one has to follow, the various different vitamins that they have to take, in fact, increase. And we were always very vigilant about her health.
Sure.
And there was your mom. There was Anka in a concentration camp, no doubt incredibly undernourished, probably not enough water, being worked all the time. Were you born healthy?
Yes, I mean, I was very small. I weighed 3 pounds, like the other two as well. We were only 3 pounds. And, a 3-pound baby nowadays put straight into an incubator. Obviously, there were no incubators.
Right.
But I always maintained I had the best incubator. My mother just held me all the time.
Yeah.
So she always says it was all down to luck, but she was a very strong woman to begin with. She was a very strong, healthy woman. and
They were
she,
all young. That was the thing.
yes, and
If they'd
young,
been older, I think
yes,
it would have been difficult. But they were young and fit and healthy. But I interviewed a midwife about how all this was possible, and of course, Mark, one of the babies, is a doctor,
yes,
and it's incredible to us that there's really no. I mean, Hannah was the sickliest by far. Her
yes,
skin was
yes,
breaking down, and she nearly died, and she was saved by the American medics. But the others seem to have been remarkably well considering, and incredibly, all three mothers, despite weighing so little, each had a little milk for them in the first instance, which just gave them something to get them through. But not only did they not have any sort of really serious physical problems, apart from, as I said, Hannah to begin with, but they've, touch wood, had no serious problems their whole life, no mental impairment. I mean, nothing. And the only thing that I could find that was in any way possibly related to their mother's pregnancies is that all three are highly allergic to insect bites, and their mothers, of course, would have been crawling with lice throughout their pregnancies. But that's the only common denominator. And actually, all three mothers went grey or white quite young, and two of them, I think, lost their teeth quite early. And the midwife said that would have been because the milk that they provided drained them of calcium.
sure.
Were you
But
surprised?
also,
Please, Eva, go ahead. Yes.
also, Avram, what was I going to say? Oh, it's just gone out of my head. It was something to do
It'll
with
come.
what you were saying, Wendy. No, the effect. When I was a little girl,
Yes.
I used to become almost hysterical if we would walking down the road and there were workmen using pneumatic drills, because I couldn't stand the noise. And my mother would have to either ask them to stop or put her hands on over my ears. And nobody sort of knew an explanation or even thought about it particularly, because I grew out of it eventually. And in later life, when my mother went to an ear, nose, and throat specialist because she had what's called Meniere's disease, which is a disease of the balance of the inner ear. And he said to her, he said, well, it's very strange because you have symptoms that usually only steel workers, pop stars, and somebody else, and miners, I think, have because of noise. And he said, and you obviously have never experienced any of those. And she said, oh, yes, I was in an armaments factory and it was incredibly noisy because she was riveting. And then she told him about my reaction to pneumatic drills. And she said, could there be any connection? And he said, yes, it was the vibration that got through to the womb. And that was the result that's why I almost had hysterics every time I came across that sort of noise. But as I say, fortunately, I grew out of it.
And tell Avram what your mother said when you were pregnant about what you should and shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, that, I mean, I want to say a typical Jewish mother, but it's probably any mother or any prospective grandmother would say the same. When I was pregnant with my first child, my mother used to say, now, have you had your calcium? And have you had your iron tablets? And have you done this? And have you done that? And she really meant it. She was very serious. And then she would say, you don't need any of it.
Right. That's my point. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
How many children do you have, Eva?
I have 2 sons.
Yeah. How are they doing?
They're fine, touch wood, and etc. Yeah, they're fine, thank you.
Lots of grandchildren.
I have 4 grandchildren.
Oh, very good. Do they all know your story?
Some more than others. My 16-year-old grandson who lives in London, he knows my story. He has heard me speak. And also what was wonderful, last year when Hannah, Mark, and I and Wendy, when we were in Mauthausen, well, my son and grandson, they came to Mauthausen. And I mean, my son, Tim, was very pleased to be there. But also, I think Theo, my grandson, he felt involved because the families were allowed to follow us in the procession in Mauthausen. So, Theo felt part of it, and also knowing a bit about the story. And also he has this slightly romantic idea that he remembers my mother. We think he can scarcely remember my mother, but he maintains he does. So that means, that's another link. That's fine.
Are you considered technically to be a survivor?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
You
I
are.
mean,
Yes.
Oh yeah, I think, yeah, very much so. I mean, I think I imagine the others would agree. I always say yes. The way I start my talks when I speak in schools or to other groups, I say, I am a survivor of the Holocaust, but only just because I was born in a concentration camp.
And her birth certificate says Mauthausen.
Yeah,
It does.
my birth certificate says, it says früheres Konzentrationslager, former concentration camp. Yeah.
Tell them
Wendy,
what you say. Sorry, I was going to say, tell them what you say when you speak in prisons.
Oh, right. Well, although I haven't done that for a long time, in the past I have spoken in a few prisons, and yeah, and it's always, the reaction is always very interesting, because I sort of say to them, my opening line for them has been in the past, well, I think I can assume that none of you was born in a prison. I was.
that's great. Good opening line.
Yeah.
Right. Why did you decide to speak in prisons?
Oh, it was because one of the charities that I've spoken for, it was actually the Anne Frank Trust. They had a program that they took an exhibition, a sort of traveling exhibition about Anne Frank into prisons, and an educator they would send, and they would nominate, or people would volunteer themselves as being trained as guides, prisoners, and then tell other people who came to see the exhibitions.
Yes.
And then they would always ask for a survivor to come and talk as well to them.
Eva is absolutely tireless, Avrum. She gives unbelievable numbers of talks in schools. She goes all over the country, indeed all over the world, if asked, to talk to all sorts of people in all sorts of societies and businesses, private businesses, city companies who are looking to have people come and talk about compassion and tolerance, and have a better understanding of what happens when hate speech is allowed to have free reign. And whenever I can, I join her, and we've spoken in cathedrals and synagogues and museums and to schools, and we do tours of schools. One particular area of northwest London, we do tours of them. We just booked some more talks for the autumn where we're going out again, and it's so moving, because these children, you can hear a pin drop when they see somebody in front of them who in the flesh Hitler intended to kill. And it's extraordinary. And of course, the tragedy is that as we're losing so many survivors now, in a few years' time, Mark, Hannah, and Eva will be the last living survivors of the Holocaust.
Yes.
And it's just so important that they continue to bear witness to what happened. And, Eva could have had a relaxing retirement, drinking gin and tonics and traveling around the world to see her various members of family.
I do that as well, Wendy.
Yes, she does that too.
With you.
Yeah, we do like our gin and tonics.
You guys have a good time together. Yeah.
Yeah, we do. But Avrum, I also have to tell you that my mother once said to me, she said, yes, I gave birth to you in the most dire of circumstances, but I also gave you life after retirement.
Yes, it's true.
Lovely. I want to take a step back about the giving birth itself. And maybe I can ask Wendy this question and you can respond with all three women. I mean, Anka's story in of itself is incredible. She gave birth in a cart at the gates of the concentration camps. Can you walk us through the three various births, how that occurred?
Yes. Priska went into labor. Priska went into labor first in the slave labor camp in Freiburg in Saxony, in Germany, where they were doing this heavy riveting of a wing for a new jet aircraft they were trying to create. And she had hidden her pregnancy, but when somebody saw her either washing herself or somehow sideways on, another prisoner saw that she was pregnant, and that was the first time that anybody in that group realized she was pregnant. This prisoner screamed and thought that it was going to get them all into trouble, and so she screamed, and that alerted a Nazi guard who came. But what they didn't know on that particular day, which was April the 12th, that was on April the 13th, the following day, the camp was about to be evacuated, and they were all going to be sent. Originally, they were going to be sent to Buchenwald to be gassed, but there were lots of reasons that didn't happen. And so the Nazis decided that actually they would let this baby be born because it was going to be killed the next day. So Priska gave birth on a plank in that factory as everybody watched, including the guards, who took bets on whether or not it was going to be a boy or a girl. They said if it was a boy, then Hitler would win the war. And if it was a girl, then they would lose. And it was a little baby girl, Hannah. And as I said, very, very poorly. Her skin was breaking down. And, you have to remember, these women were wearing the same dress that they had been given 7 months prior, with very, very limited, if any, washing facilities whatsoever. It was a really horrible situation to be in, and to have a brand new baby. All she could do was tuck it inside her filthy dress and hope that she could suckle a little and get some milk. They were then put on the train the next day, and as I said, they were going to go to Buchenwald, but Buchenwald was liberated, so the train was diverted, and a 2-day journey without food and water ended up being 17 days. And on April the 20th, which happened to be Hitler's birthday, and that's the only reason Rachel knew the day of her son's birth, because there were Nazi flags, swastikas everywhere, and the guards were celebrating because it was Hitler's birthday. She gave birth in an open coal wagon in the middle of a deluge, surrounded by dead and dying women. And at one point, they thought she was going to have to bite through the umbilical cord because there was nothing to cut it with. But she actually did find something in the end. And again, tiny 3-pound baby. She had 3 sisters with her throughout that 7-month period that she was in slave labor. She was the eldest. She had helped raise them. And she kept her pregnancy from them all the way through that time, even though they slept in the same bunk. Because she knew that if they found out she was pregnant, they would try and get her a little extra food. They would risk their own lives, or they would give up their own food, and she didn't want that to happen. Incredibly courageous of her. But when they saw her, and she'd given birth to this child in this coal wagon, they truly believed that neither would survive the night. But that was baby Mark. And then the train carried on, and they got to Mauthausen. And that is where Eva can tell you how exactly her mother gave birth.
But also what I have to tell you is that not only was the 20th of April Hitler's birthday, it was also my mother's birthday. And during the 3.5 years she was in camps, when the flags were put out, her friends used to say to her, the flags are out for you. Yeah.
That's a friend for, yes.
Yeah. Yes. So my mother was also on this same train. And when the train arrived at Mauthausen station, she had such a shock because when she saw the name, because as opposed to when she'd arrived in Auschwitz, not knowing what that was, but she knew what Mauthausen meant, and she was terrified. And she always said that she thought the shock of the name, so she thought that it possibly provoked the onset of her labor. And that's when she started to give birth to me. She was still on the train. Then she had to climb off the train unaided. She had to try and get onto a cart because the prisoners who were not strong enough to walk up the hill to the camp, they had to get onto carts. And she was, and the carts were pulled up by others. She had people lying all over her, people with typhus and typhoid fever. And there was another Nazi officer who saw that she was in labor. And he said to her, "Du kannst weiter schreien," which means you can carry on screaming, because presumably she had been. And she always said that she was screaming, not only because she was in labor, but because she thought this was her very last minute on this earth. She thought she was about to die.
Yes.
But we both survived the experience. I was born. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Incredibly, the Germans allowed a doctor to come to my mother, a doctor who was also a prisoner. And presumably they allowed it because they could hear the guns in the distance. And what I can also tell you is that afterwards, my mother discovered that by chance or fate or luck, whatever you want to call it, this doctor, he had been the head of obstetrics and gynecology at the University, I think, of Bucharest. So he didn't have any equipment, but he had all the knowledge. And what he did when I was born, after he'd cut the umbilical cord, he smacked me to make me cry, to make me breathe. And then shall I go on, Wendy, with my next sentence?
Yes, of course.
There are 3 reasons why we survived. And the first is very chilling. Well, as you mentioned at the beginning, I think, Avrum, because on the 28th of April, 1945, the Nazis had run out of gas, and my birthday is 29th. So, yeah, so if the train arrived on the 26th or 27th, none of us would have survived. The second indirect reason why we survived is because on the 30th of April, Hitler committed suicide. And the last and the best reason why we survived was because on the 5th of May, the American 11th Armored Division liberated the camp.
Wow. How do you see your life, Eva?
As being very, very fortunate, and I'm very, very grateful for everything in my life, and I always have been.
Like extreme gratitude?
Yeah. And also, as Wendy mentioned before, certainly my mother never experienced any psychological problems after the war, which is incredible. Mind you, she also said, perhaps the other mothers felt the same, she also said that she never had time to mourn all the other members of the family, and most of her family being killed, because she just had to get on with life because of me, because she was the only person I had. And she said that I gave her a reason for living.
And Eva's mother, Anka, was actually quite fortunate in many ways, because she had some relatives left when they went back to Prague, people who took them in, and people who had given the family belongings had been given to friends and relatives, and they were able to get some of those back. Priska and Hannah and Rachel and her baby Mark, they were really not only homeless, but they literally had the clothes on their back and nothing else, and really nothing else came back. And so all three had to make a decision, because, as you know, there were many suicides after the war, even with Holocaust survivors who'd survived all of that, when they discovered that they had nothing and no one, and that they were still being treated badly, particularly when the communists came into power. They killed themselves rather than have to go through any more pain, any more distress. And it just wasn't easy for these women. They just really had a very difficult time. I mean, Anka was walking down the street and somebody accused her of having a Nazi baby, because anybody who came out of the war with a baby was assumed that it was a Nazi baby. I mean, how terrible would that have been to have heard when you have just lived through all of that, and your husband's been murdered by the Nazis? And how many members of your family died in the camps? Was it 30?
15.
15.
Yeah.
I mean, a dreadful thing to hear, but to be able to not only survive the camps, but then to survive what happened afterwards, which isn't written about that much, honestly. And then to raise these children to be amazingly positive, life-enhancing, joyful people, also useful. I mean, Eva's work with the Holocaust Educational Trust and around the world is extraordinary. Mark became a doctor, but not just any doctor, the head of ER in Madison, Wisconsin, a man who has trained other doctors, who does pro bono work, who still to this day, at 81 in April, looks at people's scans for them if they haven't got medical insurance. And Hannah, who was saved by penicillin, one of the first ever civilians ever to be saved by penicillin by the army medics, became a biochemist and spent much of her life testing drugs for the NDA. I mean, extraordinary cancer drugs and things, so they have all been such a bonus to life, such a wonderful gift to us, all of them. And that's the tragedy of what happened in the Holocaust, because every single one of those people that died could have been a gift too. And that's the terrible part about it. And we're just so fortunate to have them, and to have them this long and this healthy, and long may that stay.
Wendy, as an honorary sibling or sister to Eva and the other two, what has this whole process done for you?
It's humbling, and it makes you humble, and it makes you grateful. I always said that I'll never complain about shoes pinching again, after I wrote about the women in the camps who, if they had shoes that pinched because you just got thrown random shoes, and if you had shoes that created a blister, you could die from sepsis. There was no medical treatment whatsoever. You were in filthy conditions. You had lice, you had fleas. And if the shoes were too big, they tried to pack them with paper so that they didn't slop and lose them in the snow or the sticky mud. And if they had no shoes, they died of frostbite. So, all those little things, even when you're trying something on, you sort of think, I'm not going to complain. Or if you're waiting in line for something, we all hate waiting in line. And I think about those interminable roll calls in the cold, wet clay and a bleak Polish plain of Poland with that wind and the snow, and in living in hardly, I mean, no underwear, a dress you've been thrown 7 months before, wooden clogs on your feet, and having to stand for hour after hour after hour as the Germans count you and then recount you, and people literally drop dead around you, people that you knew and loved. At several points during roll call, Anka fainted, and she was held up by the two friends either side of her, because if she'd fallen to the ground, she'd have been dragged off and taken to the gas chambers. I mean, we have nothing to complain about. We have nothing to complain about. All we have to do is to try and remember these stories and to remember what man is capable of. There's a wonderful quotation, and I can't for the life of me remember the name of the man who said it, but he said, if you want to know what man is capable of, just look to see what man has already done.
Yeah.
And there's never been a better time to remember that.
Yeah.
Do we know the name of those two people who held her up?
Yes, you do, don't you?
Well, I
Mitzi?
mean,
Mitzi?
Mitzi was one. Well, I don't know. The other one might have been Lisa, but I'm not sure.
Mitzi was one that she was with right from the start.
Yeah, that's right. Because my mother had a very small group of friends who survived, and she said it was so important to have friends, the support of friends. And all these friends survived because all these women, they were young, strong, and well able to work. And they were an enormous support.
Eva, in conclusion, I mentioned at the top of the show that you have gone on March the Living, and that is an international program taking young people to the concentration camps to show them so that they themselves can be witness as to what happened. You've gone, and I believe you're going again. Is that correct?
Yes, I leave on the 11th of April.
Safe trip. Safe trip.
Thank you.
There you met Eisenhower's great-grandson, as we mentioned. My question to you is, we live in a time which is a very challenging time, which is a very difficult time. There seems to be a lot less tolerance and respect between one group and another. Do you have hope, as Anne Frank said, that, at the end of it all, that humankind is still good, that we will come around to a point where we will respect one another more so? What's your take on the world as it stands and where we are going?
Well, first of all, I am hopeful. Like my mother was always very positive. I think I'm also a very positive person. And also one of the things that I do try to mention when I give my talks is that, unfortunately, it's only bad news that makes news. What you don't hear is all the good news. And for example, my going on this March of the Living visit with all these, literally thousands of young people, but also all the good that young people do nowadays. And I have to say, I'm particularly impressed by the young people who have become ambassadors for the various charities that I speak for, like the Holocaust Educational Trust, because on the whole, these ambassadors, they're not Jewish. And nowadays, very sadly, they get an awful lot of flack from what they are trying to do, and they do so much. And I'm in such admiration for them and so grateful, because they are taking on this mantle. And especially today, nowadays, it used not to be the case, but the last few years, they really have a very difficult time. And I can't comprehend how amazing they are to take this on and to try to stand up for what is right for all people, and to stand against racism and prejudice, regardless of where, to whom, all of that.
Well, the more things that we do together and the things that I do on my own with my last book that came out as well last year, in certain places where I speak now, I have to have protection. And I'm not Jewish, but I have to have protection because I'm writing about what happened to Jews. And it's a problem. I get trolled now every single day online for the writing that I do, especially on TikTok, which seems to be a particularly virulent hotbed of trolling. Something that's never happened to me before. And again, that's really only happened in the last couple of years. I delete, I ignore, I don't engage. We have been confronted by Holocaust deniers in some of our events, especially when I've been in former Eastern Europe. Again, I don't engage, and I shoot them down fairly quickly, especially when I'm talking about things that have happened way before and any events that are happening in the world now. But it is, it's a very controversial time. It's a very difficult time for the world. But like Eva, and maybe it's because we spend so much time in schools, Eva, we see so many hopeful faces. We see so many people, shiny, bright-eyed teenagers, looking up at us and looking up at Eva in particular, and the other babies when I travel with them, and being so moved by their stories to the point that their parents would say they will never forget meeting a Holocaust survivor for the rest of their lives, how important it is, which just makes it all the more important for us to keep going and to keep telling these stories.
Yeah, and also, Avrum, one of the things that I repeat almost every time is that nobody can identify with 6 million people. Everybody can identify with one family or 3 families.
Yeah, point well taken.
And all the survivors I know, we all say the same thing, that through telling one family story, we hope that it makes the history come alive.
Yes, absolutely.
I have a poem to read to the two of you, ode to Eva, Wendy, and Anka. But before I do, I'm so curious as to what you would say to Wendy in terms of what she has done for your life and so many others.
There aren't the words. There aren't the words. Incredible gratitude. All I can say is, Avrum, is that, she really does feel like a sister to all of us. And because we are all only children, that's even more poignant, even more relevant, even more important, because Wendy has made such a difference to our lives. And I also have to say, on a frivolous note, and it's not just the GNT, that whenever I'm with Wendy, I just feel more alive.
Do you?
Yeah, we speak every week, if not every day sometimes, and we are very close to seeing, physically close. She only lives not far away, so we see each other as often as we can, and it has been such a blessing in my life to know them all. They're all very different in different ways, and sadly, Mark and Hannah are the other side of the world, so it's not so easy. But it's been a wonderful, wonderful blessing to have them in my life, and such a privilege to call them.
That's absolutely what we feel too. And also we feel so proud, that you have done such honor to our mothers.
Well, they deserved it. They deserved it. They should not have been forgotten, and they would have been otherwise.
No. Well, yeah, and they now have also a worldwide audience.
Yes, they do. They really do.
I want to conclude with a poem for the both of you and for Anka. A woman hides a secret beneath hunger and bone in Auschwitz-Birkenau, where names are stripped away and smoke replaces sky. She carries life inside a world built for death. Anka Bergman, once a law student, a woman of intellect and promise, now reduced to almost nothing, yet holding everything, a child. And with it a decision. I will choose life. She is not alone. Priska, Rachel, Anka, 3 women in a system designed to erase them, where pregnancy is a death sentence and silence becomes survival. They hide what cannot be hidden. They endure hunger, forced labor, fear, carrying tomorrow within them. There are voices of terror, men like Mengele, and there are answers given without words. You will not have everything. Survival becomes a series of decisions, to stand, to breathe, to endure one more day. Even as places like Treblinka and Belzec count lives in the hundreds of thousands, something uncountable remains. And then, at the edge of liberation, a cart, a body nearly gone, a moment that really should not exist. Eva Clarke is born at the gates of Mauthausen, 3 pounds, perhaps less, a breath where none was meant to be, not just a child, but defiance made flesh. Years later, a question is asked, did any baby survive? And a storyteller answers. Wendy Holden gathers the lives that refuse to disappear, calling them siblings of the heart, bound not by blood, but by survival itself. This is not only history, it is a memory that lives. It is courage, quiet and unyielding. It is a thread that refuses to break. And today that thread speaks. Wendy, Eva, Anka, and the others, we are listening.
Oh,
Well, that's
thank you so much.
wonderful.
That's wonderful.
Thank
Can you
you.
send that to us?
Yes, please send it.
Thank you.
And
I will. And I have to tell you something. You know, I do a lot of interviews, and this really was one of the greatest honors in
Thank
terms
you.
of the work I've done.
Thank you.
Honestly, like I'm so inspired by the both of you, and two people 90 kilometers away from one another find each other through an article about a Canadian woman, bring it back home.
Yeah, yes.
And
Avrum,
and the love.
Avrum, sorry to interrupt. I keep interrupting you. I
No,
apologize.
keep going.
She does that.
Yeah, I also have to tell
I
you.
do too, actually.
I also have to tell you that I should have grown up in Montreal, because when my mother, my stepfather, and I, when we left Prague in 1948, we actually were en route to go to Montreal, where a lot of Czech refugees went, or survivors went after the war. They had a lot of friends who lived in Montreal. But because my stepfather just happened to get a job in the UK, and because he didn't have much money, it was sensible to stay where the job was. So as a result, I grew up in Cardiff in South Wales and not in Montreal, Canada.
Well, I guess you missed out on the snow then.
Yeah. Well, I might have missed it too.
Yeah.
You got the rain. Isn't that exciting?
Yeah.
But just in conclusion, thank you so much for
Thank
being
you.
with us. I really appreciate it.
It was
And
a
you have
pleasure.
long,
Pleasure.
healthy lives. Really.
Thank you. You
Always a
too.
pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Too.
God bless
Yeah. Thank you too
Thank you
for
so
what
much.
you do,
Thank
by
you.
the way.
Thank you.
Avrum, really, you do some wonderful work too, and you bring hope and joy to people. So good for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you. And God bless the souls of the moms. I
Indeed.
want to thank
Indeed.
everybody for being here with me and being here with us. And as my mother used to say, God bless her soul. She used to say, Sei gesund, which means go in good health. And until we meet again, thank you so much.